Hey guys, so today we're going to check out 3 phrases over 2-5-1s from 3 of my favorite jazz saxophone legends. That's going to be Lester Young, Charlie Parker, and Michael Brecker. This is just going to be a hint of what's about to go down at the virtual saxophone workshop next month. I'm going to be giving a masterclass on technique and application into your improvisation, as well as dexterity, which kind of goes hand in hand with technique, but we're also going to get into some things to just make your fingers move faster. And then what we're going to be checking out today is going to tie into the masterclass that I'm going to be giving on jazz vocabulary and language. At that masterclass, we're going to be getting into a bunch of different concepts and techniques and methods used by the jazz saxophone legends. And we're going to tie it all together so you're going to know how you can use these concepts yourself and start incorporating it into your own improvisation. I'm going to be hosting 16 live masterclasses at that virtual saxophone workshop. We're going to be working with some of my heroes, including Miguel Zenon and Bob Mincer, Troy Roberts, Alexa Tarantino, Camille Thurman, and just a bunch more. We're also confirming a few more special guest artists, so I'm really excited to announce that when we've got it all confirmed. But in the meantime, just make sure to check it out now because we've got early registration discounts running right now, and you can also use coupon code JLV50 for an additional $50 off if you book now. But today, again, we're gonna get into these 3 major 2-5-1 phrases from Lester Young, Charlie Parker, and Michael Brecker. So without further ado, let's hit that now. So the first phrase that we're gonna see here, this is a Lester Young 2-5-1 phrase from All of Me. And what we're gonna see here is Lester just plays really straightforward. All of the notes here are in the scale of each chord. And with a major 2-5-1, if you don't know this already, all of the chord scales are all really going to come from the same scale. So we've got a 2 minor 7, a 5 dominant chord, and a 1 major 7. Right now, Lester Young is playing in D major, in his D major, and really the scale of every chord is actually going to line up with D major, just starting from a different root. That is, of course, the beauty of a major 2-5-1. If you don't know anything about 2-5-1s, check out, I've got a full video on 2-5-1s that you can watch on YouTube. That's going to be a great resource for that. But for those of you who are already familiar, as you can see, Lester Young is just playing completely diatonically through every single chord here. And so what we'll see here, it's pretty interesting. We're going to see that Lester actually kind of just ignores the 5 dominant on this chord progression. Now, we're all familiar with the idea that on a 2-5-1, a lot of times you can just sort of ignore that 2 minor chord. You know, it's kind of a commonly known thing that you can really just play the 5 dominant through a major 2-5-1 all the way through until you get to the 1. But what a lot of people don't realize is that you can totally do that same idea by just playing the 2 minor chord. And that happened a lot more in swing era playing. So what you can see here is Lester actually rhymes what's going on. He sort of plays the same idea twice. So we see that he starts on a B, which is the 5th of E minor 7. Now we're speaking in his key here, to be clear. So he starts on the B of an E minor 7, and then he just plays this sort of triplet figure that brings us down to the root. So he nails the chord tones right off the top. He plays the 5th, he plays the 3rd, he lands down on the root, all in that first bar, and then he walks back up to the 5th. And then he sort of rhymes the same idea. He plays that same triplet figure in the same exact part here. He's playing it on a G and an A and a G. So what it sort of implies is that he's probably just thinking about E minor all the way through because he's not really nailing that A7. I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just that he's kind of playing through it and embracing the minor sound. He's not playing a C sharp, which is really what really defines that A7 chord. He completely leaves that out. And then at the end of this second bar on the A7, he really embraces the F sharp, which means that he's embracing the 6th. That is definitely a characteristic of swing era playing, really embracing the 6 or the 13. That's a really hip tension in the chord, and it's something that, again, is embraced more in swing era playing. You could also think about that F sharp as being a 3rd anticipating that D major 7. Either way is cool. The main takeaways from this phrase are these interesting triplet figures and the fact that it's totally diatonic. Now, it's important to know that Lester Young played all sorts of melodic chromaticism, which we're going to see all over this next Charlie Parker 251 phrase. So it's not that Lester Young didn't play chromatically, but in general, when you check out Lester Young, you're going to see a lot of diatonic playing, which is what we see here. Diatonic meaning just the scale notes. And we're going to see a lot of improvising just around the chord tones. And lastly, it's just important to remember rhythm. What we're seeing with these triplet figures is definitely characteristic of the swing era of jazz improvisation. Also, we should notice this rhythm right at the end where we've got the 3 and then landing on the 1. So we've got 1, 2, 3 and 1. That is really a common way that swing era players would end their phrases, with that 3 and 1. So all over this phrase, we're seeing, classic swing era style improvisation. Now, without any further ado, let's just check this one out and see what it sounds like. All right, so now moving on to the Charlie Parker 251 phrase, and we're gonna see this is a 251 in a different key. At the end here, we're gonna compare and contrast all these phrases all in a common key. So we're gonna put it into the same key, and we'll talk about the value of taking things into all 12 keys in just a second here. And worth taking a step back and noting that at the Virtual Saxophone Workshop, in the masterclass that I'm doing on language and vocabulary, we're gonna get into a lot of phrases that are gonna be given to you in a PDF, in a digital PDF handout in all 12 keys. And again, we're gonna talk about the importance of all 12 keys in just a second here, and we're definitely gonna get into that more at the workshop. And if you prefer to be more self-guided with this sort of thing, we do actually have a PDF package out on Jazz Lesson Videos that's dedicated to 251 phrases like this. And so it has phrases written through all 12 keys using a bunch of different concepts like the ones that we're seeing in these phrases today. But for now, we're just gonna check this one out in the original key. You're gonna see this is a 251 in B flat. Now, Charlie Parker was playing alto saxophone. He played this one in F. It's gonna be in my B flat on tenor. Now I know some of you are already gonna know what's going on here. That's right, this is Donna Lee. That's a classic tune that's written in concert, A flat major. So for me on tenor, it's gonna be B flat major. For Charlie Parker, he was playing it in his F major on E flat alto saxophone. So we see a really common shape here to start. So what Bird does, what Charlie Parker does here, is he plays the chord tones building from the root, then playing the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, then the 9th, and the 11th. This is a really common shape that Charlie Parker really popularized. You hear it all the time in John Coltrane's playing as well. He probably got it from Bird, though to be fair, swing era players were definitely playing this shape as well. Then from here, this is really important. So what he does is he plays a chromatic approach note into the 3rd. So this is really characteristic of Charlie Parker. He really innovated by playing melodic chromaticism using chromatic approach notes and enclosures. When he started doing this, Dizzy Gillespie was doing it as well. And to be fair, again, Lester Young and swing era players were definitely doing this a fair amount, but Charlie Parker just started doing it on such a genius level that it really kind of revolutionized the music, and it's a big part of what characterized bebop. So we see that chromatic approach note getting down into the E flat. We're speaking in my key in B flat. This is where I'm about to play it. So we see that chromatic approach note going down into the E flat. Then we've just got a diatonic connection that brings us down into the 5th. In the 2nd bar, now we're on F7. And then we see all sorts of chromaticism here. So Charlie Parker plays all the way down chromatically into an A flat in B3. And so what that is, that's the sharp 9 of F7. He's essentially playing chromatically down into that A flat. So he hits that sharp 9, so he gets a little alteration on that F7. Then from there, he does a full chromatic enclosure, wrapping around the 5th of the next measure, wrapping around the 5th when he gets into the B flat major 7 in that last bar of the phrase. And this is a classic enclosure where you've got 3 chromatic approach notes above and then 1 chromatic approach note below the chord tone that you're landing on. So that's what we see here. All sorts of melodic chromaticism here. Let's hear what this one sounds like now. All right, so as you can see, the melodic chromaticism here is really exceptional. This is going to be something that we're going to be getting into a lot more at the workshop, so make sure to check out that masterclass. Make sure to check out the workshop so you can come to that masterclass. If you can't make it live, you can actually check out the streaming. So everybody that books a full access pass is actually going to be getting access to 30 days of unlimited streaming access. So that's going to be really cool. If you're coming live, then you can revisit things and check it out more later. Or if you can't make it live, you can just check it out later on your own time. Rewind, pause, take notes, whatever you want to do to make sure you get the most out of the content. But either way, we're going to be getting a lot more into this melodic chromaticism concept in the workshop so you can incorporate this into your own playing. All right, so now moving on to the Michael Brecker 251 phrase. So what we're going to see here is we're going to see melodic chromaticism as well, but we're also going to see a hip substitution, and the nature of these melodic shapes are going to be a little different from Charlie Parker, though Michael Brecker was, of course, hugely influenced by Bird. So to start, we see that this one is a 2-5-1 in, speaking in Michael Brecker's key, this is a 2-5-1 in E flat. So we've got F minor 7, B flat 7, and E flat major 7. So we've got all diatonic material to start. We've got a pickup that starts on the and of 3, and we land on beat 1. We actually land on the 6th, which is kind of hip. But we're landing on the 6th in a different way than from how the swing era players utilize the 6th or the 13, depending on how you want to think about it. The swing era players used it a lot more as a note that they were embracing. Here, Brecker is just really kind of passing through that note as part of a greater shape. He goes right up to the 7th, then he just plays chord tones going down. He plays the 5th, he plays the 3rd. Then here's where we get into the good stuff. So he does this chromatic enclosure around F sharp. And the reason why I'm saying he does this chromatic enclosure around F sharp, which is not a diatonic note, this is stepping outside the scale, is because this is part of a substitution. What happens here is Brecker plays this substitution where he's outlining B minor 7. So that's a tritone away from F minor 7. He's doing a tritone sub here. So when we see this F sharp and the B and the C sharp, that's all diatonic in B minor. That's what he's alluding to here. And then this C natural that comes up is actually a chromatic approach note down into B. So again, he's really outlining B minor here. And so the C is actually a chromatic approach note in what he's outlining. So that's a little confusing because the C is actually diatonic in B flat 7, but he's not outlining B flat 7 at this point. From F sharp all the way down to B, he's really outlining this B minor 7's tritone substitution. Then from that B, he does a chromatic enclosure that pulls him back into B flat 7. He lands on the B flat after that 2-note chromatic enclosure, playing B and A as the 2-note chromatic enclosure. Then he lands on B flat. Then he's back in B flat 7, and then he jumps up an octave, which is hip, and then he plays 2 chromatic approach notes down into the 9th of the E flat major 7. So that's hip. He's ending on the 9th. He's not ending on a traditional chord tone here. He's not ending on 1, 3, 5, or 7. He's ending on the 9th here. So that ends up being a really nice way to resolve the phrase. It's a little less resolved as if he landed on the root or the 3rd or the 5th, or even the 7th, but the 9th has a really beautiful sound. The 9th, actually, to be fair, is similar to the 7th. They both have kind of a more suspended type of resolution in the effect. It's always hard to put words to this sort of thing, but I would almost call it a more airy resolution. So let's check out what that sounds like now. All right, and so as I mentioned, we're now going to check out all these phrases from a common tonality. So we're going to see all these phrases from C major. So now we're going to transpose everything. And as I mentioned before, transposition is really important. Essentially, when you transpose something, it becomes a lot more internalized. People ask me all the time, how do you just play what you hear? How do you just hear something in your head and play it? Well, learning things in all 12 keys really helps you with that, because what happens is when you learn things in all 12 keys, you fully internalize that language. It's going to be something that we're going to talk about a lot in the workshop, and something that we're going to work on getting a hang of so you can do it too. But for now, let's just check out these phrases in this common key so you can see, you can really compare and contrast the differences and the similarities even. So now looking at all three of these phrases, we see a lot of common ground here. There's a lot of use of chord tones, for sure. We've got a lot of diatonic material. Now, Lester Young in this phrase doesn't use any chromaticism, but Charlie Parker and Michael Brecker are using all sorts of chromaticism. Now, as I said before, Lester Young did use a lot of chromaticism in general in his playing, but just a lot less than what you'll see in looking at Charlie Parker and Michael Brecker solos. So then comparing Charlie Parker to Michael Brecker, we're going to see that Michael Brecker did that substitution in the middle of his phrase that made it unique. Now, I should mention that Charlie Parker used all sorts of substitutions in his playing. He definitely played tritone substitutions. And Lester Young played tritone substitutions as well. So that's not something, completely unique that Michael Brecker was doing in general. It's just that it's unique when we're comparing and contrasting these three phrases. But what's worth noting is that Michael Brecker played with different shapes from Charlie Parker and Lester Young. So what we see here is that the shapes are very interesting. He's starting with this 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, 5, 3, 2, 1 shape. That's very Brecker here. So now in this common key, it sounds like this. So that's different from the Charlie Parker phrase, which just arpeggiated up all the chord tones from 1 all the way up to 11. So definitely cool to see the difference in how they played diatonic phrases. Brecker doing a shape that really kind of like wraps around into itself, and then Bird doing this shape that just goes straight up, arpeggiating all the chord tones. And as I said before, both of these guys use a lot of chromaticism. So now seeing these phrases in a common key, it's fun because we actually can see that the second bar of Michael Brecker's phrase and the second bar of Charlie Parker's phrase actually have the same exact enclosure here. So if we look at beat 3 of Charlie Parker on bar 2, going into that C major 7, and then if we look at beat 1 of Michael Brecker's phrase on bar 2, going into beat 3, we're seeing the exact same set of notes. So definitely cool to see that common ground there. All right, so now I'm just gonna play through all these phrases in the same key so you can just hear what they sound like now, all from a common tonality. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. Make sure to join us next month at the workshop. We're going to get way more into all these concepts so you can start to incorporate it into your own playing. Want to make sure that you understand these methods and start to be able to incorporate it into your own improvising. I know this stuff has been super useful for me, so I can't wait to show you all what I've learned, and it's going to be a really amazing experience learning from some of my heroes like Miguel Zenon and Bob Mintzer. Again, it's going to be 16 live masterclasses hosted by yours truly. I know it's going to be a total blast, so I'll see you guys there.